And naturally, on account of everything I was grateful for, I started tearing up. I believed at the time that it was the spirit and that it was telling...
You're grateful for me.
Yeah, exactly. Just like one tear for Morgan, one tear for random other family member.
Hey, what's up, guys? It's ex-mormon with My Spiritual Life, and today... I have my little brother with me, Hunter, who I actually call Bucky. And Hunter, I'm so excited. So if you haven't seen a video, a few months ago I posted about Hunter. I'm not the only ex-Mormon in the family anymore. My sinner little bro.
Apostates, siblings.
Yes. And it's funny because we have very different stories. And so I've been so excited to talk to Hunter about his story. And one other thing you gotta know about Hunter is ever since launching our Patreon account, I've been hiring him to help me edit my videos for this channel.
So I can make myself look as good as I want and make her, like, out if I wanted to.
Yeah.
It's just me now.
It's my channel
It's my channel now.
I was just telling him a minute ago that I tell everyone that comes on my channel, like, at any time you want me to take the video down, I'll take it down. No big deal. Like, you're in full control. And then I realized, oh yeah,
I have all the control.
He has the login. He has literally full control.
I have so much control that I will now spill a secret. Morgan flips her hair like 10 times a video. It became so bad during this one video that I thought about creating a montage.
Oh no!
So
A
good luck.
montage of hair flips.
Yes, just a montage of your hair flips.
Guys, it's a problem. It's a real problem. Oh my gosh. Okay, I am so excited. Hunter, sorry that I assaulted you at the beginning of the video.
You're
but thank
good.
you. I'm just literally so excited that I can't contain it. So me and Hunter, we don't live real close together, but we're at a family reunion right now, which is why I'm not in my usual setup here. And we snuck away from the reunion to have this little chat. The interesting thing about our stories is that even though we both grew up in the same family, in the same religion, and then left the same religion, we really landed in very different beliefs. Like, I would probably consider myself more... like believing in God, but not really religious per se. But you consider yourself...
atheist humanist.
Yes. So I'm excited to hear about how this all evolved. So do you want to go ahead and tell us kind of the beginnings? Actually, give us just a tiny bit of backstory of like...
how
you
I
grew
was
up in the church.
Okay.
Just a little bit of that.
Yeah, that's fair.
In the Mormon LDS church.
So... of course, growing up in the church, I think always the most fun thing was, like, the primary songs and, like, all the time spent in primary, kind of making friends, singing, and all that. But I never really got into that as much as, like, the other kids did, I would say, since I was always pretty introverted and very sheltery, you could say. So it was never that fun for me. I remember when I was little, Mom would let us, like, sleep under the bench, those pews at church. And ever since she stopped letting me do that, I couldn't handle...
Bitter.
Yeah, I was bitter the whole time. We would always be, like, fighting. Me and my siblings me and my closer age siblings would be fighting over, like, who Mom and Dad would give back rubs to during the
like scratching
sacrament
your back.
and stuff like that. That was always the highlight of the day, I think. And those are the best memories I have.
Okay, I gotta say one memory from church I have from when you were little.
Okay.
And I think you'll remember me telling you this story. So you were probably like 6 or 7, and let's see, how many years apart are we? You're 18.
I'm 18.
And I'm 26.
So that is 8 years.
Yeah, about. So you were probably 6 or something, or 8, somewhere in there. And so I was older, so I would help take care of you and the other kids. And so one day we were going to church, and I had taken you guys separate from Mom and Dad because of their callings. And we got there, and I was really stressed because we were running late, and I was like trying to juggle you and the other kids because I was the second oldest, and I have 4 younger siblings. And I'm like trying to juggle all of you guys, and you guys are just like being difficult because you're young, right? It's not like anything wrong.
And they got that heavy responsibility for being the oldest.
Yeah.
Pretty much at the moment.
Right. And so I'm trying to get you guys into the church building, and as soon as we walk into the doors, you say, I'm thirsty and I have to go to the bathroom.
I remember
and I'm
this
like,
now.
are you kidding me? I'm like, okay. So I march you over to the water fountain. I'm like, get a drink right now. I'm like mad. I'm like, how dare you be thirsty on the Sabbath? I'm just kidding. I was just so stressed. So I'm like, okay, get a drink. And you just stood there and you stared at me. And I was like, just get a drink, Hunter. What are you doing? And you just stared at me. And I was like, what's wrong with you? And so finally you were like, I have to go to the bathroom first. And I was like, why?
Because if I drink water, I'll just pee it right back out.
That is exactly what you said. And then immediately the anger washed away. And I was like, let's go to the bathroom first. And I was like, it was a moment where I was like, I realized I was too caught up in the hustle and bustle. And that was like a precious, cute little moment, you know, of like, oh no, if I drink this water before I pee, I'm just going to pee it right out. I'll be thirsty again.
If church is about anything, it should be about moments like that, probably. Just those cute family moments.
Yes, and we have a lot of those, so that's a good thing. Anyway, okay, so growing up in the church, you said you didn't love it, but like you didn't...
I tolerated it. There were definitely some good moments that I could look back on happily. I think it's because of the church and hymns that I can actually somewhat sing. So that's positive. I don't think I'd be able to sing at all if we didn't like grow up singing hymns all the time.
Cool.
And
then, so getting into like your preteen and teenager, any red flags that you remember?
I remember having some very scattered thoughts. Like, I remember a common thought I thought a lot was how I look in the Book of Mormon, and because, you know, I never read that far into it, because why would I waste time reading a book with old words, even though everyone said I should?
You know what they're going to say to that, right? Is that, well, you were never truly converted.
I did, at some point, read through the whole thing in chunks.
Yes,
but
I'm just teasing you.
And of course I know a lot more about it now.
Yes.
Especially the Bible, but... Alright, so pretty much, there's the story, of course, of the Nephi, Laman, Lemuel, the whole family. And I always thought it was interesting how...
And that's in the Book of Mormon.
In the Book of Mormon, First Nephi.
Which is a scripture that is very... It's just Mormons use it.
There were a few things that really confused me. The fact that Laman and Lemuel, after refusing to do things many times, literally saw angels, and yet still would refuse to believe. And then the fact that even after they saw angels, God didn't, like, kill them or even, like, burn them out or anything like that. They just,
God didn't even smite them a little bit.
Did. I mean, he shocked them at one point, apparently. Right. They didn't say how severe it was. They fell down. But, yeah, like, they weren't killed. They weren't, like, eternally punished. In fact, what happened at the end is Nephi and the rest of the family ran away from them. So, God didn't even, like, push them away from the family, which... I always felt like was going against like what we were teaching, that like if you were to actually see these signs that either, I guess in a way that what I mean is in a way they almost supported it and pushed away against it, because these were supposed to be your symbols. Like, look at Laman and Lemuel, they saw angels and they still turned away from God, so who are you to say that you want a sign? I always feel like the church is saying that. Yeah. And that's always kind of been a problem for me. I'm like, why did they get to see signs? Like, why don't we get to see signs? Because if they got tested and they failed, why should that mean we can't get...
That's a good question.
It almost feels like we very much believe that sin is not passed down, that we aren't inheritors of Adam's sin, but then how come people like Laman and Lemuel get all these second chances, even after literally seeing heavenly beings...
Which is kind of contradictory to, in the Doctrine and Covenants, it talks about how the worst sin is, like, denying the Holy Ghost after you've had a witness, right? Which, denying the Holy Ghost would be even lesser than if you saw God and then denied it, or saw an angel and then denied it. And so, it does seem contradictory that, like, how did they get second chances, but we're told that the worst thing we can do is turn against our testimony that the Holy Ghost, you know what I mean? it is kind of odd, so I totally hear you.
I also thought they got quite a raw deal because, like, in most of the Book of Mormon, it just talks about how they're mumbling and they're talking in low tones and they're scheming, and I'm like, I mean, wouldn't anyone? After you're forced to leave everything, you are rather rich. Apparently, you're forced to leave everything behind, go into the wilderness, take only the most important belongings. Wouldn't you mumble, think your dad is crazy too, think about leaving? Maybe, if it gets to severe, maybe even think about doing something non-pleasant. Especially after Nephi already killed a guy. Nephi even killed a guy, which I also messed with me. I'm like, I think in the Book of Mormon, I believe it says that you should kill this man or else, like, your generations will wander in disbelief. But I'm like, why do you need to kill this guy? He's already knocked out drunk. What you're gonna do will only take, like, an hour max. Yeah. You could, if he's not literally knocked out, knock him out. Right, and then he will not mess with your plan. And he won't ruin anything you're doing. And why did God have to let him die?
He'll just lay there naked.
Yeah, exactly. It's a better punishment, honestly.
Which, for those who don't understand what this is about, it's in the Book of Mormon. There's a story where Nephi has to go and get the brass plates from this rich guy named
Laban.
Right. And he's drunk, and it's like, oh, God delivered him into my hands, and then he kills him so that he could take his clothes and go get the plates, like, to pretend to be him, which brings up a lot of questions. But anyway, moral of the story is Hunter is bringing up these points that didn't sit right with him as a teenager. Yeah,
these were the very simple things that I kind of just, didn't think much about, but they were just kind of weird, I thought.
Just weird translations,
just weird,
right?
Pretty much. I suppose you could say that.
It's the truest book on all the earth, but not, like,
but,
that true.
It's just kind of weird sometimes.
Right.
Never thought much further than that. I never read into anything yet, or did anything, until I believe this was, like, freshman year of high school. I was taking...
Actually, before you tell that, really quick, my next question is, did you feel like you believed the church was true at any point?
Oh, okay. Time to get into the spiritual experiences here. I forgot to do that.
That's okay.
So, I would say my biggest experience and my biggest belief and testimony of the church was when we went to this bishop's fireside meeting, which is just a meeting for, like, all the ward youth to go to, and, like usually there's a lesson, and usually there's a lesson, and we'll have some activities, some snacks. So this one was all about patriarchal blessings, which are the Mormon fortune-telling future blessings, you could say. And so you're supposed to get, like, that blessing when you're, I believe it was...
anywhere 12 to 18.
12 to 18, but I think I was, like, younger than average at that point.
You were, because most people are more 14 to 18, but
they usually expect them to 12. They expect you to get them at, like, 14, 15, but I was 12, and so I decided, like, on the car ride home, I started, like, praying, and I was like, oh God, please, should I get this blessing? And then I started thinking about, like, everyone in my family that I was grateful for, and naturally, on account of everything I was grateful for, I started tearing up. I believed at the time that it was the Spirit and that it was telling...
You're grateful for me.
Yeah, exactly. Just like one tear for Morgan, one tear for random other family member.
That we're not going to mention here.
That we're not going to mention. 200 others just down. And, so I thought I was having one of those profound spiritual experiences, and I thought at that point, like, this is all obviously true because I'm crying here. Why would I be crying? So then I got my patriarchal blessing. A lot of crying is still for that.
Right. From the outside, what people don't understand is it's a very special moment. It's kind of like you're finally growing up and being one with God and, like, making that commitment. And it's very special, and I still look back fondly on my experience with getting that patriarchal blessing. Yeah. And because it was very tear-invoking, because it's all like, oh, God loves you so much, and, like, you have great things that are going to happen in your life. And so it is very beautiful. Like, I don't have a huge issue with it, except that it does... For some people, it tries to tell them what kind of decisions to make for their life. I just
remembered that. One of the big things that they're pushing is that your life will follow this patriarchal blessing if it's righteous. And I'm like, so if I'm not righteous, I won't see it happen as it says. But of course, leave it so vague. I suppose it's fine.
Some people's are vague. A lot of people's are vague, but I've heard of some people's that are really weirdly specific.
Okay. Mine wasn't too.
It depends on your patriarch. I've heard a lot of people say, too, that their patriarch gave them the exact same blessing that they gave someone else in the ward.
Ooh.
And that really rocked their testimony. Because if this is a special blessing from God that's supposed to tell you about your life, why would it be exactly the same as someone else's? So I've heard such a huge variety. I really have.
So I think a few highlights of mine that I'll go ahead and talk about were my patriarchal blessing included saying I was going to have like the power of healing. My mom thought that meant I was going to become like a doctor. Even though I'm pretty certain I was talking about priesthood powers, and I'm definitely not a doctor.
Not yet.
Nor am I planning. I'm going into tech. That's why the heck I'm editing this lazy channel here. You know,
oh my gosh.
I'm stuck here.
You don't know what it's like having a 2-year-old.
But yeah, so I'm going into tech-based stuff, but that patriarch blessing, Mom interpreted it as me becoming a doctor. It also said the typical things, like, oh, you're going to raise a family, and you're going to go on a mission, because 99% of all Mormons do, most of the time. At least male Mormons for the mission part. Of course, that didn't end up happening, because I became atheist, like, literally a few months before I would have had to sign up for the mission.
Yes.
Alright. And I think there were a few other times, mainly when I was younger, like, there was some guy speeding up and down our street, and I prayed for him, and I felt good. Almost like that, like, good feeling. A mix of, like, self-righteousness and gratitude and all that. I think that led together to make that cocktail of emotions that bombarded me.
Right. So tell me, so you're giving some examples. Did you think that the church really was God's one true church?
Oh, yeah. I was terrified of other churches because for a while one of our siblings was dating someone outside the church for a decent period of time, and they went to a different church at the time, and I remember that sibling mentioning that she felt the spirit there and that she was confused about it, and I was just like, they were like, does that mean that I could be led away by another church?
Oh, no.
So whenever we would visit relatives who weren't part of our church and they would go to church, I would do everything in my power to avoid going to church. Partially because I did think church was boring, and then also partially because I was worried about being led away by these false doctrines that they were spewing over this pew. I always had that, like, Bible-thumping, hell-spatting, priest in my head. And I just thought all the churches would be like that.
Right. You know what's so interesting is that we see this in high-demand religions a lot. Is just that there's a lot of, like, putting fear around the falling away. Like, you gotta watch out. It's so easy to fall away. Like, it can happen to anyone. Like, and so there's that fear of, like, I have to avoid so many things or my testimony is going to collapse. And it's like, it's weird when you think about, it shouldn't be that easy, right? It shouldn't be that easy if it's God's one true church. How could it be that easy? Now, we could be wrong, right? We could be wrong, and it could be just that God set it up that way. It just seems odd, right?
Yes, it does.
Like, why would God
if it's God's
make it
true
so
church,
tricky?
Why would he give us such mixed history, such mixed scripture? If God wanted to communicate with us perfectly, why doesn't he communicate with us perfectly? Right. Written word is not good because it's up to anyone's discretion how to,
Unfortunately, it's always an imperfect person writing down what God is saying.
If God wanted to, he could literally speak personal messages directly into people's minds. Some people claim they get that, but most people just claim to have the feelings for the most part.
Sure. So you really believed, right?
I really believed,
so
yeah.
then fast forward to your freshman year.
I believe it was either freshman or sophomore year of sophomore year.
Guy.
Sophomore year of high school. I was taking an English class, and in the English class, we were told to read a book, The Crucible. We also watched the movie of it. The Crucible, for those who haven't seen or heard of it before, is the story of the witch hunts in really early America, back in, I think, the Shaker, Quaker period.
Yes.
So the really religious uptight period. Pretty much, they got these court documents of an actual witch trial, and they wrote this whole story based on it to go along with it, which is really interesting. The biggest thing that hit me about it was that these people, I guess I should just start from the beginning here if I want to
Sure,
get the idea.
sure.
So there were some girls who were, I guess, just really feeling crazy someday and decided to go dancing naked in the forest. So some person saw them doing that and thought, witchcraft! Dancing naked is witchcraft!
Right.
So then what happens is this pastor guy comes into town at that time. And the girls are, of course, being accused of being witches. And the only way for them to get out of that is to then accuse others of leading them into it. So then this starts blowing up. This starts blowing up as those girls accuse a handful of people that those people are witches. Most of them are, like, lower down people who could, like, be easily killed without people, like, thinking much.
Right.
But there were a few higher tier people that got names, which led to some uncertainty in for a little bit. Then the actual trial starts. So there was this whole crazy thing with, like, this fake voodoo doll being placed by one of these girls that was faking it into this person's house to make it look like they were a witch. That led to a lot of tricky situations for this one couple, like the main couple. Eventually they get to court, and the girls do a really good job at faking feeling like when a witch would come onto the stand, the girls would act so scared. They would go shaking in their boots. They would, and like, if the witch said anything towards them, they would act like something was flying above them and stuff like that, to the point where everyone in the room thought they were seeing things, that the witch was, like, casting spells on them from the pulpit.
Wow.
From that, I think, is pulpit the right word?
Sure.
Got church on the brain still. But yeah, so, and everyone in the room thought they could literally feel these spells being cast. And of course, eventually this ended up in the hanging of a lot of people. The original main, the original main evil girl, I guess you could say, ran away, wanted to take someone with them, but they didn't want to go because they would have rather died with their wife. Very heroic, I guess, ending in the way that they sacrificed themselves with their wife rather than run away. It's a good read. I suggest people read it. I spoiled the whole thing, though. But oh well. I mean, it's important.
Spoiler alert.
It's important to... It was my first ever delve into the idea that we humans could be fooled, our emotions, that these people who were all very God-fearing people, I guess witch-fearing as well, were able to so fully believe and feel that these witches were attacking them and harming them and truly bringing upon plagues and who knows what else abominations to the community. And I wondered if my testimony, my feelings, could also have been manipulated just by my circumstances.
So that was kind of your first questioning of, like, wait a second, if people can be convinced of this, what could I be convinced of that's not true? Something
that also came to my mind at that point, now that I knew that people could be convinced of things, I also wondered yet again about the other religions. Why are there so many religions in this world? Why did God allow Christianity to split so much? If there was going to be one true church, why couldn't you just kept it all together from the beginning?
Sure.
I always heard that the original, like, apostles or whatever were killed off, but I mean, God is God, and he probably could have either prevented that or just appointed new ones.
Sure. So why... Right, because the Mormon church teaches that the apostasy, just years of the full truth being lost, and Joseph Smith was the one that came and restored it, and it's like, wait a second, why was it lost for so long?
I had a big problem with this. So, like, I would talk to my parents about this before, and they would say that in that medieval time, the Dark Ages, like, you know, the classic, like, castle knight stuff, that they just weren't ready for the truth. But I'm like, but I mean, anyone is ready for the truth if you teach them at the right time. So
it seems
even a baby can learn basic things.
It seems a flawed argument to be like, oh, well, God knew that they couldn't handle his truth. It's like, really? Like,
I mean, he let them go to war over his truth, so...
Right. It does seem odd.
Didn't do anything about that.
Sure.
It was a messy time.
Yes.
Very messy. Alright, so besides all that confusion about whether my feelings were true and whether the church at its size was true and all the history stuff, the next thing on the step up to my shelf breaking, I suppose, was there's this channel I like to watch. I do recommend him. His name is Thunderfoot. He's like a scientist who his main thing is going on Patreon and finding those like blow up Patreon things that are obviously scams and proving through science, mathematics, and logic why they are scams.
So he's exposing. Okay.
He exposes general scams.
Cool.
Now, this one day he went down some. So he apparently had this series. He called "Why People Laugh at Creationists."
Creationists.
Specifically, he when he does that, he talks about like Bible literalist creationists who believe the Earth was just created 2,000 years ago.
Right.
So specifically, there's this video on Noah's Ark. So I decided to check it out and figure out what's going on. So this guy, I don't remember exactly where, but decided to create this huge Noah's Ark attraction. It's supposed to be the size of like the real Noah's Ark. And the whole video was just Thunderfoot burying the Noah's Ark myth, using all the science and logic, showing how, one, the ark size of wood could not float, because wood, once you get to that size, will not be able to hold the buoyancy, and things like the size and the feeding of the animals and how that wouldn't have worked, and other problems like that. He also talked about the manpower, how it took like, I think it was tens of thousands of man hours with this modern equipment to build this. And if Noah only had his family, even if he had like 70 years or whatever, or maybe even hundreds of years like the Bible has said Noah lived for, he could not have gotten those tens of thousands of man hours that even with modern technology we required to build it. And he wouldn't have the pre-cut wood and all those saws and neat tools to actually get it done so fast.
Right.
So building it already kind of seemed impossible, and even if he built it, floating with it seemed impossible. And even if that happened, then also the flood, apparently we have no evidence of a worldwide flood, because Egypt and other like ancient, especially Mesopotamian, maybe I'm way off with my time periods there, but civilizations existed before and after this worldwide flood was set to happen. So that was a big problem as well. So it couldn't have been a worldwide flood.
So you watched that video, and what did that make you think about the Bible and about the LDS Church?
I felt really bad for watching it, mainly. Like, I felt that I was sinning, first off.
No.
And then I went to apologist mode. I was like, you know what? I don't know that we really believe the flood story, because the Bible is flawed. And, you know, like, you just don't worry about that. We got the Book of Mormon, and that's better, right?
Yeah, and that's a big thing taught in the LDS Church, is that you shouldn't trust the Bible, but you should trust the Book of Mormon. And it's one thing that can kind of keep people from going to other religions, is because they have such a distrust. They're taught from so young to have such a distrust for the Bible. Which is actually not always a bad thing, because, you know, the Bible says a lot of crappy things.
Especially the Old Testament.
Right, and the New Testament has amazing stories and wonderful, like, philosophies and all of that, and that's great. But anyway, this is just the generality that we grew up with.
Yeah. We don't even, like, ever talk about the Old Testament in church that I can remember. Like not much at all. If we talk about the Bible, it's always the stories of Jesus.
Well, I remember we tried to dissect the Isaiah chapters.
Really?
And it was always, like, I remember doing
those
that a lot.
confusing things.
And it's like a headache.
I haven't actually gone through and read those in forever. I should do that with my new atheist eyeballs and see what I get.
So boring. When you can't get...
I will say, the Bible has gotten a lot more interesting when I've been able to see it for how it is.
That's true.
When you can really see how warmongering and stuff the Bible of the Old Testament is. It's really interesting to try and you can almost try and figure out the personality of God just through his actions.
Well, you can learn so much about the people from that time.
Yeah, and you learn about the time, too, because...
It's so interesting.
Because culture creates the scriptures, not really scriptures creating the culture. I mean, it does go both ways, but...
Well, and the Bible has a lot of merit, even if it wasn't created from God, because these people were having revolutionary ideas of what it meant to be a human and to be a good human being.
Yeah, the New Testament was pretty great. It was very, very progressive for its time.
Exactly.
So I'm happy about that came out.
Yes.
Unfortunately, some mistranslations led to the hating of gays, but...
Right, right.
I don't know who all knows about that, but apparently Old Testament said like almost like molesters or something like that should be hated, but then between the Old Testament and the New Testament it got mistranslated to mean gays. And then I believe it was it one of Paul's letters? Or
I don't know a whole lot about this.
I believe it was one of Paul's letters. I think it was maybe the Corinthians or something like that. He literally wrote, "Oh yeah, we still are against like," and then he listed out a bunch of things like thieves, murderers, and homosexuals.
Right.
Which
right.
apparently was a mistranslation back from the Old Testament, which is funny. And it's
And
just
it was
that,
supposed to say molesters, not homosexuals.
at least that's what people are thinking now. At least that's a pretty good reason to actually love the gays. So you have an excuse now. Go run with it.
I did read some articles about that, and I hope that is true.
I believe so.
And I know we have a lot of Christians actually that watch this stuff, but I mean ultimately what it comes down to is like we got to remember that no one's perfect and that no one who was writing God's message in the Bible was ever perfect and that's okay. You know, they don't have to be for it to be a helpful book for some people. You know what I mean?
That's fair.
So anyway.
But yeah, I guess we are getting really off topic. I should probably move back on to my stories. So I saw Thunderfoot's video, the Noah's Ark thing. It kind of broke that story for me. So at that point, I went into the apologist mode, as I said, and I'm just like, okay, you know, the Bible has flaws. Move on. At that point, I was looking at the Book of Mormon. We had to take seminary classes every single morning, 5 a.m. Had to wake up 5 a.m. to go drive to some class, and then after that, wait like an hour, and then go drive to school. So I lost so much sleep over it.
Let me give some context. So it's like part of the church organization is that the 12, or is it 14, 12? 12 to 18?
I think it's like, are you saying age?
Yeah, for seminary.
So the age of seminary is just when you're in high school.
Okay, so it's 14 to 18. It's required, pretty much required, that you go to seminary. And not that you can't be an upstanding member of the church if you don't go, but it's very frowned upon. And so seminary, it's like a Bible study kind of thing, and they study the different scriptures that through our church. But what's interesting about it is that in places like Utah or Idaho, they actually offer that in the public schools, that you can take it as an optional class so that you can take it while you're at school. But in places like Missouri, there's not enough Mormon population to offer something like that. So their seminary classes have to be before school. And in order to get a time where all the kids can meet at once, all the Mormons, where they aren't conflicting with each other's school schedules, they have to meet at like 5 a.m. in order to have class before they all have to go to school.
Right.
And so go ahead.
All right, so seminary was a very bumpy ride for me. The first year I was going to seminary, I had a teacher who did not know how to speak up for herself. She would just let us sleep in class. She wouldn't do anything about it, and she didn't really know enough about the scriptures to answer any really deep, prodding questions, which I was already starting to have some at the time because I'd already, experienced some of the stuff, and, I was starting to kind of look at things a little more, so I would have deeper questions. Something that always fascinated me was the idea of the second coming. The idea of something telling the future and trying to interpret what the future is supposed to look like from that always seemed so cool to me.
Yeah.
Which is still kind of interesting to look down about how at least people in that time might have thought the end of the world was coming.
Right.
And it's interesting because I think Jesus said that he was coming back in his lifetime or something.
Sure.
Stuff like that. It was always fun it's always fun to study. So I would fall asleep most of the time in that first year of seminary. I was definitely one of those that just did a lot of sleeping. Then the second year onward, we joined a different seminary group, which is technically outside our zone, so it was not regular. It's not usually what they'll do. But we had complained enough about the teacher not knowing enough and not being harsh enough on those sleeping that we got to move over. So this new teacher of ours was a lot better. He knew more, and he worked really hard to set up these lessons. And he did a good job just in general trying to make sure we were actually doing things and learning things.
Sure.
He came up with some fun activities and stuff. I don't know about came up is the right word since they regiment seminaries so hard. every single lesson is already written down beforehand, and you're just supposed to like go through it and really do it. We know that because he had us teach some lessons, and literally it's just go to the website, write down notes, and do whatever it said to do.
Right.
So it's very, the church is very hands-on with it. They'll even have like people come in and check on the seminary and see how it's going. For people who are questioning at that point, they have some sources that are very approved sources. You know, you don't want people doubting.
Right.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
I never ended up asking too many things that required going to many sources too much, but I do remember asking some questions that were really shaking my faith at the time, related to what was big on my mind at that time was the idea of the afterlife. A big question that hit me was, if everyone gets the chance to go to the celestial kingdom in the afterlife, why does it matter that we were in the church to begin with?
Yes.
Especially if I've heard before that it's a disadvantage because now we could be like led away.
Right.
And like
so
we could be punished for that.
I'm going to give a little bit of context. So in the Mormon church, it's not the general Christian theology of like there's heaven and hell. It's like there's kind of this vibe of like everyone gets a second chance, and if you didn't get the gospel in this life, you'll get it in the next life, which is why it's so appealing to a lot of people. Because it breaks that theme of Christianity of like, oh, if you didn't believe in Jesus in this life, too bad, you know, because that seems pretty unfair. And Mormonism has a way to answer that question pretty, you know, it seems justifiable, right? That God would want people to have a second chance. So there's this theology with Mormonism that's kind of like, okay, so if you didn't believe, or you know, you didn't get a chance to learn the gospel, you'll learn it in the next life. And there's some people that even believe that even if the plan of salvation says there's 3 different kingdoms of heaven that you can go to: the celestial, telestial, and telestial.
See, turtle.
Yeah.
There's always a way to remember.
And like there's the highest and then the lowest, and some people believe even if you go to the lowest that there's ways you can kind of make recompense and end up being in the highest anyway. So what you're saying is,
I actually always heard that whatever kingdom you go to, you're stuck. I never heard the idea that you can actually like move up. It's
vague.
Fair enough.
Some people will say, you know, but like you said, there's this concept of you're almost better off not knowing that the church is true, because if you know that it's true and you turn away from it, that's the worst case scenario. Because if you never knew about it, you could just learn about it right after you die and it'd be fine.
And if you're a good person, you accept it, and you're like, I mean, it's pretty obvious if there's angels flying around you and stuff that you're going to accept the truth.
Right,
so
why wouldn't you?
Like, why bother? Why bother even learning about the church in this life? Like, why didn't he just let it die out or something? Or why even bring it in the first place?
Right,
if this earth is a trial, it doesn't really matter because you still get to accept it afterwards.
Right. I totally hear you.
There's one more place that our church also talks about, which is outer darkness. Now, the only people who go to outer darkness are those who supposedly have literally like had some huge vision. We kind of mentioned this before, but like literally saw God or the Holy Ghost and stuff like that. Had these perfect witnesses of Christ and God and have turned away. Mm-hmm. So like if a prophet supposedly like went off teaching about how the church was wrong after he had like these visions or whatever, that it was really true and stuff like that, he would be going to outer darkness. I had issues with that.
Right, and outer darkness is like the Mormon version of hell.
There's some dispute whether it's literally hell or whether it's nothingness, non-existence. Either way is kind of bad.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
And tell us why it bothered you.
So, there's something very dictatorial about a being who's like, you're gonna go to either hell or you're gonna like not exist, so I guess in that way almost kill you if you know I'm real but don't believe in me. It feels like, you know how like those big regimes would always be like, if you don't follow me, I'm gonna kill you.
Right.
You know, go to Stalin, go to Hitler. They would have those people who would go out and kill anyone who dissent.
Yeah.
And I start to look at them, I'm like, God can't be like that, right? And I brought up stuff like that in seminary, and the teacher, you know,
And was this more recent, or?
This was, I would say this is the last year of seminary that I went. The rest of the time was just kind of meh, I would say. But the last year I went to seminary with that teacher. He did not know the answer to those questions. And his solution to that was just to allow us kids to talk about it and not say anything. Which didn't seem like a great idea in looking back, because I probably placed a lot of doubt in some very very minds. Believing people's minds.
I see.
Through those very concerning questions I had.
Right. Well, I have to say, I think it's cool that as a teacher, he let you guys have conversations about it. Because what I see more often than not is shut those conversations down. Don't think about it. Don't talk about it.
That's true.
Don't doubt at all. So that's actually cool that he let you guys kind of go off the rails a little.
My problem is he never intervened. He never even suggested what he thought might be the answer. He's just like, figure it out yourself. And I'm like, you're helping me?
Oh, that is frustrating. That is frustrating.
It's not helping any of us.
Right.
Like, he thought he was helping us by just having us conversate, but without answers, it doesn't help, because we're just all vaguely throwing out random things that...
Right.
That's another problem I have with apologists sometimes. I feel that they're creating doctrine that isn't there. And that's what I felt like we were doing in the class. Like, just the other kids who didn't want their faith to be harmed were just kind of like suggesting...
We have to make all these...
You just have to kind of make up things to make you feel better.
Right, those mental gymnastics.
That just get troublesome.
Yeah, so moving forward again, where did things really start to fall apart for you?
I would say when I finally really started analyzing how God acted, in the very, like, the thing that hit me hardest was first Nephi, which is, of course, the story yet again of Nephi and his family. They have to travel across the wilderness to avoid being destroyed. For that city that's going to get destroyed, which I think it was just more taken over than destroyed, and it's kind of weird. But they get out of that city, they're into the wilderness, then they have to, like, drive a boat, you know, drive a boat across the sea, all the way to the Americas, using this, like, compass thing. My problem with that was that God tried to murder them on the sea. These people. So... what happened is, apparently, Layman and Lemuel were dancing.
The bad guys.
Yeah, Layman and Lemuel, you know, the bad people. And also wives and apparently most of the family, I believe it describes.
Right.
Were dancing and being merry. And he doesn't really go that far to describe it. So I'm wondering if it was literally just, like, dancing and partying, or if what was going on there. Because it could be interpreted like that.
It's very unclear what really negative thing they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't even say that, like, I don't think it even said they were drunk or anything. It just said they were being merry.
Right. Which, in drinking, wasn't even not allowed back then.
Yeah, that was...
like... that was, like, a thing that came in the restoration of the church.
So Nephi comes out and is like, you can't do this, you can't party. So the brothers tie him to the mast.
And Nephi was the good guy, the protagonist.
Nephi was, of course, the good guy for, you know, wanting to stop this party. They tie him to the mast. And they take control of the ship, which I guess is insubordination or whatever, but...
Yes.
I mean, what harm does it do? Mm-hmm. In the long run, they were feeding him. Apparently their family could talk to him all they wanted. They weren't supposed to set him free, but, like... I mean, it's wrong, but it's not like... Right. And then God decides to send a storm their way that practically sinks them. Nearly. Right. And it does not stop. It almost kills all of them. And also, the compass that they had only run on faith for some reason. Like, their faith was just messing with the electromagnetic, like...
Of the compass.
Of the compass, just like... That.
So tell me how that affected your testimony.
So, God tried to drown them, of course. And not until they untied Nephi and Nephi prayed. And I'm like, after seeing all this, I'm like... Why would God try and drown them if he's always this father figure, which I've heard people say all the time. God is our Heavenly Father. He's teaching us the way to be the best in life. Does it sound right for a parent to attempt to kill their child for doing something that's wrong? And even if you don't consider it death because there's an afterlife and stuff like that, like, it's still suffering. You know, like, imagine hurting your child very, very badly for something that they did wrong that they didn't even really know was wrong.
Right, they didn't, yeah.
Like, worse than even like spanking or anything, because death is painful, especially like drowning and stuff like that.
Right.
That's bad.
And watching your family drown, too.
No matter what you believe happens in the afterlife, it doesn't exactly make up for that act in the first place.
It seems, right, it seems pretty, I hear you, it seems pretty malicious.
It very much seems.
For, like, a loving
it's
father.
It's very, yet
God.
again, dictatorial. It feels like this... My idea of God was starting to break in my mind. He was looking less like a father and more of this dictator, which I guess is kind of how fathers were back in the Bronze Age when you think about it.
Sure.
They were the dictator of the house and all that.
Yeah.
Right. So that was tricky on me. I remember I had this specific thought of like this whole drowning thing, and we were driving to seminary that one day, and I was telling my younger sibling up front about how I thought about this, and I was saying, God at this moment seemed more like a dictator than like a father, and so she's just like, no, don't talk about that. I don't want to hear about that. No. Mm-hmm. And I don't think she was that hostile as I just made her sound. I think it was more like she was scared to hear.
Right, which is what we would expect from her, because that's what you're taught to do is, even doubting is kind of like
doubting
a sin.
God is a sin, pretty much.
That's how it feels.
Doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith.
Thank you, Victor.
So, boy, that led to a lot of inner conflict from me, because I had all these feelings and thoughts and ideas, yet no one around me that I knew of that I could speak it to, because I wasn't like out of the church like this apostate.
Right.
And I wasn't like...
So did you feel like you couldn't talk to me about those things? Because
partially, and then also partially, I just didn't really think about it at the time, because you were so out of our life at that point. She had moved away. She was living her own life.
I've got my husband and kid, and right.
Of course, that whole thing happens, and I can't talk to, like, my siblings about it at the time. At least that's how I felt.
Right.
And then I believe that was when I found this channel. I believe the channel name was Telltale. It's this channel that likes to go around and look at cults and other high-demand religions.
Yes, analyze their behavior. It's really good.
They have this whole bite model going where they'll try and figure out...
Steven Hessenberg's bite model is like defining cults.
Yeah, so the whole idea is to figure out which high-demand religions or groups are cults and try and... well, I guess spread the word that they are. Mm-hmm. So I found them for the stuff on Jehovah's Witnesses, which I'm like, yeah, it's not our church, and so it's funny looking at them. And then I'm like,
right.
Then I guess I did see a few interesting connections. I mean, nothing too huge.
There are some parallels.
There are some parallels, at least with the whole denying of outside sources. At least there wasn't our church didn't have the same shunning issue. Thankfully, our family, like me and Morgan grew up in, we had some trouble, but there wasn't too much shunning, which was nice.
Yes, overall...
especially since Morgan was like the first real apostate. I
paved the way for you.
She paved the way. It made it a lot easier for me.
It really did, because it taught our family like the right and wrong way to handle the situation. Because we realized really fast, like our family, our siblings and parents and stuff realized really fast that treating me the way that they were initially was making it so much worse. And not that I didn't handle it perfectly either. And but anyway.
So I find Telltale's channel, and I see his videos on Jehovah's Witnesses, and I enjoy them. And I see some other like cultish groups that he does things, and I enjoy them. And then suddenly one of his videos pops up in my feed, and it's about Mormonism.
And what was your initial thought when you saw that?
I did not want to watch that video.
Did you think he has to be wrong about this?
I was thinking that... I think I had a bunch of mixed thoughts. I'm like, I really like this YouTuber, but... I guess I had this mixed thoughts, like... I mean, maybe he has good points, but no, he can't be right about this. Doubt my doubts before I doubt my faith, so I can't watch that video. And so I actually sat on watching that video for a good few weeks. I knew it was there, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Because I already felt like I was straying off the path for not even believing in Noah's Ark at that point, which was already pretty different, because we were raised very fundamentalist Mormon, I believe.
Pretty orthodox.
I say fundamentalist just because I know fundamentalist Christians are the ones who believe like in the
Sure.
Noah's story and in like the Tower of Babel.
Oh,
perfectly.
yes, that's what you're referencing.
And
yes.
in our church, we also believe like in the Tower of Babel. It's literally in the Book of Mormon again, which I hadn't thought much about at that point, but also has many issues.
Yes, of course.
As that goes.
So then what happened? What did you?
I found that video.
You kind of wanted to watch it though, right? But so tell us more about that conflict. Like you want to watch it, but you don't want to watch it.
So, I did watch his other videos, of course, and I continue to watch those because I still liked them. Of course, during that time when I wasn't watching that video, I just got more of these questions, noticing things in the Book of Mormon and the Bible that were kind of off. Just more acts of God being assholey and stuff like that, which I didn't feel comfortable noticing. And at a certain point, I would say probably a week or two after I first figured out the video was there, I kind of broke and watched it in my room.
Okay.
So, I don't remember exactly what the original video was on because after watching that video, it linked me to a different channel, and that channel linked to a different channel.
And you just started
And I
binging.
spent like 2 whole days binging different ex-Christian, ex-Mormon, and atheist channels.
And tell us timeline-wise, was this just a few months ago?
This was, I would say, I stopped going to seminary. This was right before coronavirus hit. Like, I would say this was like
February.
half a month before coronavirus really hit hard.
So maybe like February of 2020.
I'm going to say somewhere between February and January, February, somewhere between February and March, most likely.
Cool. So pretty recent.
Yeah, fairly
And
recent.
as you're watching those videos, tell me what emotions are coming up for you.
I had a lot of hatred.
Oh.
I was mad that all this stuff, all this history stuff, all this doctrinal stuff was, in a way, hidden from me. At least it felt like it was hidden from me all this time.
Yes.
I remember when I was little, like, one of my siblings coming up to my mom and asking about polygamy and why we practice that, and mom giving her answer on that. It was, kind of typical Mormon answer.
answer.
Like, they needed it for the time, and, like, God commanded it. And I thought that was kind of interesting. But then I learned
in early church, Mormons practiced polygamy, and it was, like, part of the doctrine. And
but then I learned that it wasn't just polygamy, but also polyandry, as Joseph Smith married the wives of some people who were already married.
Right.
And then I'm like, that's not right. That's not for repopulating the earth at that point.
Right.
Which was a big thing. There are a bunch of other small things, like I learned how apparently even the Mormon Church's doctrine, like there were changes made to the Book of Mormon as time went on, how the church almost evolved from believing in the Trinity to not the Trinity, and that was a very heavy thing to me because I was always told that church never changed, that it was always the same, but to see that the scriptures, our Book of Mormon, apparently underwent thousands of edits to change things, really shook me, because if God was telling Joseph Smith firsthand what to say, then how can it be wrong?
Yes, it's very confusing.
Especially once I learned the hat in the stone in the hat, which feels like if it's true, it must be a very precise thing, right? Because God's literally feeding you those words.
So to give context again, Joseph Smith, we were taught that he read from the plates that Nephi and them wrote on.
Like he had these like goggles,
translated through the power of God, with his Urim and Thummim goggles, whatever. But then come to find out later that there's a lot of accounts of people saying that no, Joseph would take a rock and put it in a hat, and he would put his head in the hat, and he would read from that rock. And when you hear that, you're like, when you hear that, and you hear that that's actually true, and there's several cited sources for it, then you're confused because you're like, why would the church lie to me? Why would it lie to me if it was God's true church?
Why would they teach us about the Urim and Thummim? Why would they put all this artwork of him literally reading the scriptures, even though they were usually in some closet down the hall or something?
Right. It just seems pretty shocking when your whole life you've trusted this organization pretty blindly.
So then another big thing that hit my faith was, this is all rough, but I mean, there's still the testimony of the witnesses, right? So he obviously had the golden plates. And then I learned that he wrote up the testimony thing and he signed for them. On top of that, almost everyone who had been signed for was related to either Joseph Smith or the Whitmers, either married to or directly related to, which there was this funny quote I saw, I think it was by some famous guy, and he's like, I wouldn't feel more confident in the Book of Mormon if all the Whitner family had signed.
Oh, I see.
And I'm like, it's funny looking at that, and I'm like, well, okay, so... And then I also thought, like, about other religions and how there are, like, hundreds of people who would willingly sign a book saying that they had done or seen things.
Right, and they can't all be right. Someone has to be lying.
I'm starting to wonder, like, if we're really just believing the testimony of these people, or the testimony and what these people supposedly did and saw, there are a lot of people who did and saw a lot of things that were crazy. Like,
and it's so confusing.
Even those ones that, like, drink the Kool-Aid and died probably had things that they testified that they saw and did. I think they believed in aliens or something. I don't know enough about that. I should research more. Yeah. Be interesting to learn more. But
yeah. So you start watching all these videos and everything is crumbling.
Everything is crumbling. And the shelf is well beyond broken. It finally gets to the point where after that 2 days of binging, I have all of this built up inside me, and I'm like, there's no way I can just keep this bottled up. So I decide I'm gonna go out into the living room because Mom was like set up in the living room, and I was gonna go, I guess you could say, confront her about all this.
Sure.
So I head out there and I start talking to Mom about all this. She doesn't really know what to defend for a lot of things, so it kind of ends up being a lot of swapping topics after I make a point. Like, I'll say something like, why does God act so ruthless in the Bible if he's supposed to be a loving parent? And Mom would just be like, because we need it. And then she just jumps onto another topic that proves her faith. In the end, it kind of just evolved into what all these debates will, which is just just the other side saying that, well, it doesn't matter because I still have my personal witness and testimony that it's true no matter what you say. And I'm like, but... because I read the Crucible earlier on, I realized that
you can't trust
feelings and personal testimony like that because it has led to some pretty horrible things, apparently.
It's true. And so, from her perspective, she's just saying all the things that she's taught to say and believes. She 100% believes what she's saying is like, just bearing her testimony and saying, well, God has told me that it's true, so like why should I think of anything else? But you're feeling probably pretty maybe dismissed and like not taking your concerns real seriously, maybe.
I think that was the final nail in the coffin. The idea that Mom didn't have any really good responses to all these problems I had with the church when she was always so strong in the church. I always like looked up to her as like the ultimate like spiritual witness. She always tried so hard to make sure we go and all that. The idea that her super faithful self that always studied that would study scriptures for hours with her parents, couldn't answer these what I considered almost base testimony breaking questions. Felt rough because these aren't even like uncommon questions. These are the big ones that everyone apparently seems to face when they're leaving the church.
That must have been really hard for you.
Yeah, it was.
Right.
So, during this whole debate and conversation, I have my little sister comes in. When we're in this point of, Mom's just talking about all the spiritual experiences she had with different things like, ghosts and stuff. And, of course, I don't really believe that anymore. So I tell her I don't think I believe that stuff happens. So my little sister, who's had a lot of experiences like that, comes in crying, saying, so you don't believe that I would do this? Like, why would I fake this? And she kind of leaves the room, crying. At that point, I swear, the world flipped upside down.
Yeah.
I knew before my questions had hurt my sibling, my little sister, but had never sent anyone crying before. And I started to wonder why... I felt like a bad guy, but I started to wonder why these questions hurt so bad. Why we had put so much trust in this stuff in the first place.
Yeah.
I started to wonder why we were raised to believe instead of raised to question and then, go with what we found. Because if you can't defend or not bring emotion into an argument, then it's not... Then can you even believe it's true if you can't have a good debate on it?
Yeah.
You're never going to learn anything if you can't talk about it.
Right.
I'm always willing to talk to people about how I became atheist and my drop out of the church, but oftentimes, since the rest of my family is still very Mormon, they still do all the typical Mormon things, have sacrament meeting, especially with the pandemic. We're always having it at home, which is nice because I don't have to go to the church building for 3 freaking hours. I think at that point, I'd just bring a separate car and stay for like the first hour and leave or something.
Yeah, because you're still living at home.
I'm still,
which makes it hard. Yeah.
I will be moving off to college soon.
That's good.
Which will be nice.
That's good.
Freedom. Yeah.
So tell us, like, what other emotions you experienced on that day, like you were mentioning with your siblings and your parents, and like feeling like, almost like you feel like you disappointed them, and you hurt them with your doubts.
Yeah, I would say it was very much a mixture of disappointment and hatred most at that moment.
Hatred for what?
Hatred for the life I have lived up to that moment.
Okay.
The idea that I have kind of based my whole life around this idea, this ideal, and the idea that it's false suddenly means my whole life, all that work, all that waking up at 5 a.m. to go to seminary,
right.
all that time Mom and the others telling me to read my scriptures every night because it'll strengthen my testimony, all that time going to those activities, to scouts, to Tuesday activities, and this takes up so much of your life as a Mormon.
Yes.
And how many times I didn't want to go, but I went because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And all that suddenly hits me because now I'm realizing that if it's not true, then there was little to no reason to have done all that.
And it's just heartbreaking.
It was.
It's devastating.
I probably cried a number of times between those 2 days of me watching videos and coming out. So the conversation with Mom and the rest, I guess some scared members of the family. There's another member of the family who was already agnostic at that point, and everyone knew he was agnostic. He wouldn't take the sacrament and stuff. He kind of just sat in on the argument. Mm-hmm. He sat in on just the side, didn't say anything, didn't do anything, just kind of watched because, I think he had some of these thoughts, but didn't really want to do anything about it and didn't really want to study it either way. Mm-hmm. So he was just kind of... I did end up talking with him later, and, he considers himself agnostic, though I think he's kind of more on the atheist agnostic point now. It's hard to say. I mean, of course, it's up to him to decide in the end.
Sure.
It was just kind of interesting, because it did feel good that he was there, because when I went to talk with him later, he was able to kind of tell me that what I was thinking and saying was true, that it kind of felt like they were dodging some of the bigger, harder questions by just moving topics and stuff.
That you weren't crazy
that I wasn't crazy
your issues.
Because
that you weren't,
sometimes that
you weren't stupid.
The debate felt gaslighting because it was my parents, technically Mom and stepfather, and my sister, who ran off, who wasn't really there for very long at all. So whenever it's even more than one person against someone, it'll naturally feel like you're in the wrong somehow, even if you're completely right. So I felt very gaslighted with the way that they would answer my questions by just trying to almost push them away.
And your questions were so sincere.
Yeah, they were all problems I had.
Right, they were real problems.
They were pretty.
And I think it was so. I don't even know if you know this part of the story, but it was that sibling you had mentioned that is agnostic texted me and was like, "You should probably call Hunter because crap's going down." And So I called you and I was like, this is not my business if he doesn't want to talk about it. So I don't think you even know this. But so I called you and I was just like, oh, just making conversation, just checking in.
I don't think I said anything at that point.
No, you did. You don't remember. But
wait.
Because this was the same day. So what happened was I called you and I said, hey, how you doing? What's going on? And you were like, what do you just jumped right into it?
You're going a little ahead here. I want you to backtrack a bit.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so after this whole debate happens, I couldn't really get out of it until I had this bishopric meeting. Not bishopric, sorry. because I was part of the priesthood quorum meeting, which happened at the bishop's house.
Right.
So I had to go to the bishop's house and, pretend to be this still happy Mormon,
After having that huge
debate and realizing that my whole world's shattered, I had to go there and be all happy.
No.
I thought I was pretty fine at that at the time. And then I get in the car. For some reason, I thought I called you, but I guess you called me.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I remember now. I had missed calls from you. Then I decided to call you.
Oh, that's what happened. Okay.
So you had tried to call me, I think, while I was at my bishopric meeting or something. Not bishopric. Meeting. And so I had these missed calls, and I'm like, you know what? I think Morgan is probably one of the only people I can talk to about this right now.
Yes.
Because I hadn't even thought about, yet again, you were kind of moved away. You were out of our life, and I didn't even think about it.
Right.
So the phone call happens, and
but it was so funny because again, I was like, I'm not gonna get involved unless he wants to talk about it. So you call me and I'm like, hey Hunter, what's going on? You're like, so what do you think of God?
Pretty much. It was like, where do you fall in the church?
Yeah.
Because I didn't remember how atheist you were, or how, I guess,
you didn't really know what
out
was
of the
going
church
on.
you were.
Knew
more like,
my channel existed, right?
Yeah, but I didn't know much about it.
Yeah, you had never watched it.
I'd only seen the funny, Sister Jenkins parts, which we could laugh at even in the church, which was great.
Yeah. And so then I was like, oh, we're going there. Let's go there. So I was like, well, I don't believe the church is true. I don't really know what I believe. I like to believe in God, and then you just went woo, you vented.
I spilled
3 days
everything.
worth of videos and arguing and thoughts and years of frustration, and it just, and I was just like, do you remember what I kept saying to you?
Not exactly, because I was just
I was just pretty much like, dude, yeah, you're not crazy. Yeah, I totally hear you.
I must say, the individual words and things get lost in the hundreds of hours of videos I've watched and the hundreds of conversations I've had with our agnostic sibling and you, and there was a good 2 or 3 weeks where I would call up Morgan on the regular and just be like, Morgan, I need a rant.
Yes.
And that was very, very, very helpful. I guess very comforting too. Yeah, it was a very interesting month, I guess you could say.
I was just so glad that you didn't have to do it alone, and luckily I had Jared, but I still just felt so alone, and I felt like the whole family just didn't understand me. And again, they've been wonderful. They've come a really long way, but it just you feel that separation, and it's hard, and they feel it too. It's hard for them too for different reasons, but I was so glad that I could be there for you. So that you had someone and you didn't have to feel like
you really need an outlet, or else you're going to end up saying from the family and they'll hate you.
Pretty much. You'll ruin your relationships if you can't find that healthy outlet.
I've always felt at a disadvantage, especially since, I always feel like everyone in our family is free to bear their testimony as long as it's about God.
Right.
As long as it's about God and Jesus Christ and how Mormonism is true. But if I were to say anything about my journey out of the church and how that experience was for me, I would be shut down.
Yeah.
Which always felt off to me, because I'm still attending these family sacrament meetings and all this stuff, and it's not like I'm not forcing them to attend my testimony meetings where I talk about how my testimony was shattered. And it always just, to me, that always felt like a one-way battle, because I can't say anything negative about their beliefs, but even though they don't know it, they're constantly what feels like attacking my beliefs, which is weird.
Right. And that's the problem that happens between the Mormon and the ex-Mormon community, that is a huge struggle, which is that it's we kind of want to tend to protect the people that are in the church, because they're like, oh, you're the one that left, you're the one that, and so you need to respect our beliefs, and we do need to respect their beliefs, but we also need to have the freedom and space to express our feelings, and so it's hard when it feels like they are quick to shut you down, and well, we can say what we want, but you're not allowed to say what you want to say. It's just hard.
A thing that I often get told is, you wouldn't like it if I made fun of what you believe and do, and I'm like, that's what I've been doing for forever. I've been questioning what I believe and do. I don't like doing anything without a reason now. I don't like going into anything without researching it anymore because it just doesn't feel right to just go into something because I don't know, just because.
Right.
It feels wrong.
Right, and how could that make you bad, right? It's just wanting to have good rationality. It's like, if God really was real, didn't he give us a brain for a reason? Like,
yeah, I also wondered that a lot. Like, there was the prophet that said, if the church is true, then it won't be hurt by evidence. Investigation. And if it isn't true, then it should be hurt by investigation.
Yes.
Unfortunately, investigation has hurt the church a little bit.
Right. Right.
I just wish I could share these things sometimes with the rest of the family, but...
It's so hard.
I mean, when I eventually have a family, I don't know if I'll have kids or not, but if I do, they're going to heckin' know all of church history.
Right.
If they decide to join the church at that point, then that's on them, but they're not going to be questioning any little bit of church history.
Right.
If they're doing that.
Right. Well, and it's like, I think a lot of Mormons don't understand because they get this stigma that we're just negative, we just want to tear them down, we just want to break their testimony. What they don't understand is the way we see it is we were lied to. And if you're being lied to, you would think people would want to know, and so you want to tell them.
Just like how you want to spread this thing that you love as they feel. They're spreading the gospel, the thing they love. We want to prevent the spread of things we don't like or that have harmed us directly.
Yeah.
And I feel our family has gone through a lot of trouble thanks to this.
Sure. Well, and like I try so hard to hold this space where like I want, like, if I've learned anything after interviewing and talking with so many people of so many different religions, it's you can't judge anyone for believing something and you can't judge anyone for not believing something. And I think, like, I try so hard to be respectful and to not say things, but it is hard. It's hard to not say things when you feel like they are living their life on something, on a premise that they don't have to. It's hard. And for them, it's hard for them not to say something because they're like, we're being taken over by Satan, and it's like, we don't know it. They gotta tell us. Right. So it's like, we both think that we're right. We're both trying to fix each other, and it just doesn't work.
If Satan is the logical one, what does that mean? If someone can be that easily persuaded, what does that even mean?
I know. So, tell me a little bit of the aftermath, like emotionally and with your family.
All right.
With our family.
Of course, now that my whole belief system was out the window.
Right.
I had no idea what I was or wanted to do. I questioned everything I'd ever done before, right. And I was wondering what the heck I wanted to do with life. At that point, I had figured out I wanted to go to college, State Tech. I'm brandishing a shirt right now.
Boom!
But yeah, so I was gonna go to State Tech, but I didn't know what I believed anymore. Like, what is wrong? Like, what is
right and
what
wrong?
What is right and what is wrong? If like, is like sex before marriage wrong? Stuff like that.
Right.
And also maybe pleasuring yourself, is that also wrong?
Right.
I was very odd because I made it all the way to like 18 before I even would dare even look at anything considered even remotely pornographic.
Right, because the Mormon Church is very, very against porn, right?
Yeah.
And so there's that fear that's put into you. But it's funny because most teenage Mormons end up looking at it because of the shame that's around it.
Utah has like the highest amount of like porn consumer age, I believe.
I've
which
heard
is
that
hilarious.
there's this weird psychological thing that happens when you put all the shame around stuff that makes it more enticing.
If you believe something is gonna be addicting along with the shame cycles, it's gonna be addicting along with the shame cycles.
So then they do it more. Anyway, it's just so funny.
Just leads to more.
So you start questioning, okay, what's right? What's wrong? Is God even real? Is that God, where you were?
I think at that point I didn't believe God existed because I had no good reason to believe God existed. Because I was starting now at this point, I started to understand how Christianity was formed. And I'm like, and it seems like these other religions were formed similarly. And I'm like, none of these look like they can be real because there was this period of time before them. And why wouldn't God make himself known the whole time was a big thing for me.
I see what you're saying.
Like, why would he come in so late? And there were a bunch of other questions, like, even if God exists, are we really what he's trying to create? What if he was just trying to create some other entity that either came and went, or is something we'll evolve into millions of years later? How do we know that he didn't create some other star system and we're just some random offshoot of it, if he does exist? So at that point, I'm wondering, does it matter if he even exists?
I hear
Does it make a
you.
difference?
Right.
So yeah, at that point, I would say I'm atheist. I don't believe God exists, and I don't think I have any good reason to believe that God exists.
Sure.
And that's where I fall there.
Well, and I have a lot of sympathy for
Yeah.
people who leave Mormonism and go atheist. And I've talked about this on the channel before, but I get a lot of people that will say in the comments stuff like, well, you left Mormonism, why'd you have to leave Jesus? And what you have to understand is, what's really hard for people like us is, okay, you grow up with this spiritual conviction that Jesus loves you, and you also grow up with this spiritual conviction that the Book of Mormon's true.
They meld.
And when one of those doesn't hold up, you don't know how to hold the other one up anymore. And so to me, I'm like, well, I have a lot of sympathy for anyone who leaves any religion and can't hold a space for belief anymore. So I feel for you.
So that was tricky. I think I'm the only one who's gone full atheist in the family, but that's fine since you've been very respectful. The agnostic brother, me and my agnostic brother would have some really good conversations too.
Great.
So that was always pretty nice. Let me think. So at that point, I wondered, of course, what I believed. I figured out that I thought that I wanted to live my life a little more. I also started looking more into, like, what's going on with drugs. Like, I didn't do anything, and nor am I planning on doing much there, but I don't like the idea of going into anything without researching it. So now I think I kind of understand what's going on with that. The war on drugs and all that. The outlawing of weed, which is technically healthier than even alcohol. Which was a shocking discovery for me.
You were experiencing morality for the first time ever through the lens of doing your own research.
When looking at it from a secular lens.
Yeah.
Secular meaning non-religious, pretty much.
Right.
Suddenly, I'm realizing all these things I was born in, like the whole idea that I've always been raised this idea that the government and the church should be more intertwined than they were. But then suddenly I'm outside the church. I'm like, no, heck no. I do not want church and the government to mix.
Right.
That does not sound like a good life. So I ended up joining a humanist. I'm a humanist now, which the base beliefs, there's this 10 commitments that they have. I can't name them all off the top of my head, but I printed them off and I put them on my wall. And I recommend for any of you who are more atheist leaning to go check them out. They are a good group that is shooting for bettering the world through charity, service, and less religious based government type stuff.
Yeah.
In general, because if you want freedom for religion, you need freedom from religion.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. Where did you hear that from?
One of my favorite atheist YouTube channels is
Cool.
It's not too uncommon to hear.
That's cool.
It's a fun quote.
I love that. So tell me, like, if you could go back and give yourself advice, like, during your faith crisis time when you were kind of, like, freaking out, what do you think you would say to yourself?
That's something I've always kind of struggled with because I suppose you'd have to say it would almost depend on when I'm talking to myself. Was it back when Noah's Ark thing? Was it when I was binging those videos? Because when I was binging those videos, there's not much I could say to myself at that point. I was just just riding the wave.
Yeah.
I guess if I had to pick a point where I could talk to myself, it would have been right after the debate with Mom, and my parents in general, when I felt pretty bad and very gaslighted at that moment. And then, of course, going on to the meeting. Thankfully, Morgan was there for that, so that didn't end up being too bad.
And what would you say to yourself, though, after that argument?
I would say write a lot. Writing became an outlet for me for a little bit. I was writing a book at the time. I've currently put it on hold, but I may resume it at some point. College, I'll have a lot of free time, surprisingly.
Right.
So I may resume it there. And then I also wrote about the experiences I had, like how I was feeling and about those debates, how I felt the church has harmed our family. Of course, I won't publish that one yet because I don't think our family would want that out. But stuff like that. It just was very very comforting to be able to write that stuff out.
Right. So you just needed that expression.
I started
right?
journaling again. I remember how much in the Mormon church especially, they really push journaling and the idea that if you aren't having many spiritual experiences, look back in your journal at your old spiritual experiences and let them strengthen you.
Right.
And so I started writing down in my journal about everything that I'd gone through and all the things that had shocked me and about how life was going. And it'd been like a good year since I journaled before, so
Sure.
So I took up a lot of space.
Right.
Going through that. So I still journal like at least once a week or so now.
Sure.
Just to keep things moving and really keep a history of what's going on.
That's good. And so if you could give advice to other people who are like struggling with their faith, is there anything you'd want to say to them?
I would say I was pretty lucky to have a few outlets to go to, because if you don't have as accepting as a family and you don't have someone who you can talk to as easily. Like, I had Morgan, and I had my journals, and I had my brother, who I could all talk to and get these feelings out. Then it can be very rough, because you'll almost certainly, without meaning to cause any damage, end up saying things that'll hurt people and push you all further away. Right. Your best chance is going to be either to find someone you can convene with, or find some way you can let out that anger without hurting anyone, or else, I guess, find a way to get out of the house as soon as possible, if you can't find any other way.
Yeah, right. That's wonderful advice. Ultimately, as humans, we all just want to feel heard and understood and feel like we belong, whether we're Mormon or whether we're not. And so I thought that was great advice that you were saying, is like, you got to find someone to talk to. There's great online forums. Mormon Enlightenment on Facebook's one I always recommend.
I'm still on
people.
I'm still on ex-mormon Reddit.
Reddit is a great place. Just find people to talk to. Your feelings and thoughts matter. And whether you decide to go back to being Mormon or not or whatever, it's okay to want to have someone to talk to regardless.
All right, and with that, I'd say that's the most of my story. Who knows if I'll ever come back on the show. I'm sure you guys will be seeing my handiwork in the edits. Yes. So just remember, every single time Morgan gets made fun of on her own video, it's me.
Yes.
So,
Hunter, and I will just say, I'm so proud of you. And not because of leaving the church or anything like that. I'm just proud of you because you're an awesome person, because you're very accepting, because you're super fun, and you're very understanding, and you're very non-judgmental. So thank you for being an awesome brother. Thank you for being there for me. And thank you for being an awesome editor.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for letting me come on and share my story. I think it's something nice to be able to... It's my first time ever going through the full story in one go, so it should turn out well.
I hope it will be cathartic for you, because I feel like everyone deserves to have their story be heard.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
As long as I don't get driven mad by my own voice, I'm sure it'll be fine.
Maybe I'll have to edit this one.
I can probably handle it. I want to get paid after all.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you so much, Hunter. And thank you guys for watching. Thank you so much for your support. I hope that this video helped you, because I know that all of us have such different stories, and the more stories we can hear, the more it can help us all feel less crazy. Thank you so much to our amazing Patreon supporters. We couldn't do this stuff without you. Hunter was jobless before you guys. I was able to hire him because of the money we got on Patreon, and I wouldn't have been able to keep the channel up if it wasn't for getting the money to get an editor. So, win-win-win. Thank you guys so much for your support. Yes, and thank you. Please don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.
Bye.